What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to be discussing both Battlefront 2015 and Battlefront 2017 and trying to figure out which of the two games was actually the better game. Both games have had their entire live service now, and so I feel like now is the best time to compare the games, seeing as the content is done and they are essentially in their final state. I think most people, myself included, kind of just assume Battlefront 2 is the better game by a pretty long margin, but as I sat down to kind of keep score of a bunch of the different categories that I'm going to be covering, it's actually a lot closer than I ever thought. Now, keep in mind this is all just completely subjective. There's not really any fact involved in this video in regards to which of the two is better. Each of the categories are really just going to be taking into account my own personal opinion, as well as taking into account the community response to each thing as well. So just keep that in mind throughout the video. There's a ton of categories we're going to be going through today, which are graphics, gameplay, bugs and balancing, customization, heroes, maps, base game content, post-launch content, and quality of life mechanics. Obviously that is a lot of different areas to cover, and I could probably compare each area for hours, so I'm going to do my best to just keep it pretty short and get through each category without dragging the video on for too long. Now, just quickly before I get into it, I do apologise for most of this gameplay being arcade gameplay. I don't have any of my old footage from Battlefront 2015, so I had to make do since it is pretty hard these days, at least on Aussie servers, to find a game in Battlefront 2015, so apologies for the lackluster gameplay. So getting stuck straight into the first category, which is the graphics. This is kind of an unfair comparison in my eyes, but graphics are a large part of any game, at least for some people, so I feel like I do have to cover the graphics. Now, the graphics in Battlefront 2015 were amazing. I remember the first time I ever played the game, and I was thinking at the time that it might have been one of the best looking games that I ever played before, and usually that goes hand in hand with a single player game, but the fact that I was saying that about a multiplayer game was pretty mind blowing at the time, so that does say a lot about the graphics of Battlefront 2015. Battlefront 2, on the other hand, is obviously a few years newer, and so therefore, as you would expect, the graphics are top quality as well, and in some areas they are definitely better than in Battlefront 2015. I would say Battlefront 2 has much better character models than Battlefront 2015, mostly in regards to the faces and the heroes and stuff like that, and especially when you compare Chewie in both games, the difference there just really stands out more than anything, so Battlefront 2 definitely wins in terms of the character models. Now, as for stuff like the maps, this is honestly a really tough one to call. I'm not sure what it is about Battlefront 2015, but the maps have such a nice look and feel about them. I think it could be to do with the lighting maybe, but I really can't put a finger on it. With that being said, the Battlefront 2 maps all look and feel amazing too. There's barely enough of a difference between the two for it to be a noticeable change. Overall, I think I have to give the point to Battlefront 2017 here, as the maps and environments are both really similar throughout both games, but the character models in Battlefront 2015 are definitely a little bit worse than in Battlefront 2, so Battlefront 2 comes away with the point. Moving on, we have the gameplay, and gameplay is a pretty broad term, but I essentially just mean stuff like the gunplay, the hero gameplay and saber combat, starfighter gameplay, and just a bunch of other stuff like that. Now, at the time, Battlefront 2015 felt like it had some really solid gunplay, and it does, but playing it now, it does feel like it hasn't aged all that well, to be honest, and really as soon as Battlefront 2 dropped, I could tell that the gunplay was a little bit better in the new installment. In regards to the hero gameplay, it sounds really weird saying this because honestly, the Battlefront 2 hero gameplay is kind of cooked, if I'm going to be honest, but despite that, Battlefront 2 hero gameplay is just so much better than Battlefront 2015. This one really is not even worth comparing in my opinion. The blaster heroes were decent, but Luke and Vader were just so bad when it came to fighting each other, and even fighting troopers wasn't the best either. Obviously they were both very strong, but essentially what I mean is just the gameplay of it was just not very smooth at all. As for starfighter gameplay, once again Battlefront 2 does reign supreme here. The Battlefront 2015 vehicle gameplay did just feel a little bit clunky and slow, whereas Battlefront 2 vehicle gameplay, at least in regards to the starfighters, did feel a hell of a lot smoother, and in all honesty that might have been one of the biggest improvements gameplay wise between the two games. For me, this one isn't as close as the graphics. Battlefront 2 definitely comes away with the point in terms of the gameplay. Now, gameplay is one thing, but a huge part of the gameplay is the bugs and balancing side of things too, and despite the fact that I lean so heavily towards Battlefront 2 in the gameplay department, the bugs and balancing are a whole other story. Battlefront 2 may be one of the most buggy video games that I've ever played in my life, in all honesty. It was riddled with issues from day one, and sure, it did get a whole lot better throughout the game's lifespan, but even to this very day, when DICE have said that their vision for the game game is complete, there are still far too many bugs in the game that just never got fixed. Balancing is also still an issue, with Vader being massively overpowered, as well as certain weapons and vehicles dominating the battlefront, and overall the game just isn't in a good state at all when it comes to either the bugs or the balancing. Battlefront 2015 did have its own issues with bugs and balancing too, don't get me wrong. The old Lando Sharpshot was one of the most overpowered things I've ever seen, but overall the game is just far more balanced, and in terms of bugs it's not even a question as to which of the two is better in that regard. So for me, Battlefront 2015 easily wins in this category. Moving on, we then have the customization, as in cosmetic items and stuff like that, and this one is a pretty close one. At launch I would have definitely said Battlefront 2015, since Battlefront 2 had almost no customization whatsoever at launch, while Battlefront 2015 had a hell of a lot of trooper customization. But I think as of right now I'd have to go with Battlefront 2, as throughout the lifespan of the game they really did add a whole lot of customization. Currently there are, I think, over 180 different skins in the game, and sure, some of those are duplicates for different factions, so the number might not be completely accurate, but either way there are still a whole lot of skins in the game. The trooper customization is crazy, especially in terms of the clone army. There's probably almost 100 different skins throughout all of the different classes for the clones, and then even when it comes to the heroes as well, they really did turn that around, and despite the fact that some heroes still have no skins, such as Vader for example, overall I think there are just a really solid amount of hero skins in the game. So it was much closer early on, but I've definitely got to give Battlefront 2 the points here, just because customization became such a large focus throughout the lifespan of the game. Moving on, the next thing on the list is the heroes, and this one is actually pretty close as well. Now, I'm not talking gameplay here, I'm just talking about the amount of heroes, which heroes they had, and the uniqueness to each hero as well. Battlefront 2015 gave us a total of 14 heroes, whereas Battlefront 2 gave us a grand total of 22 heroes, and in my opinion the heroes in each game were fantastic. I really can't pick a favourite in terms of which set of heroes I liked more. I'd probably slightly lean towards Battlefront 2 just because there's more heroes and from more eras too. It was awesome to finally see the likes of, say, Grievous and Obi-Wan in a modern day Star Wars game, as well as seeing Kylo Ren and Rey in there as well for all of the fans of the sequels. So for me, this is a pretty tough one to choose between, but just due to the numbers and the variety between eras, I think Battlefront 2 takes the cake for me in terms of the heroes. Moving on, we have the maps from each game, and this one isn't to do with the look or the feel or how many there are necessarily, more to do with the actual level design and the flow of each map in the game. Battlefront 2015 was obviously only one single era, so a lot of the maps were very similar in terms of the look and the feel, but one thing that I loved is that for the most part, they all played very differently, and they all played really well in terms of the flow, the pacing, and the balancing. Battlefront 2 has got some absolutely great maps in there, don't get me wrong, but one thing about the majority of the Battlefront 2 maps is that they are very linear, which causes there to be a lot of choke points and overly chaotic areas, and in some cases that can be fun, but in most cases it's generally just pretty frustrating, and it really slows down the pacing of the game on maps like Naboo or the last phase of Endor for example. I personally think Battlefront 2015 had the better maps in terms of level design. There are some all-time great maps in that game that I think a lot of us will remember forever. There was so much more variety there, and they also seem to knock it stale nearly as quickly as Battlefront 2. So for me, Battlefront 2015 comes away with the point for the map category. Moving on, we have the base game content, and what I mean by that is mostly just what content there was and how much content there was when the game launched. Battlefront 2015 had a fair bit of drama surrounding the launch of the game. There was a limited amount of maps, and there was actually only 6 heroes in the game at launch, those being I think just Luke, Han and Leia, and then Vader, Palpatine and Boba Fett. Battlefront 2 on the other hand launched with 14 heroes, as well as I think 11 large scale maps, and then a month later after launch we got 2 new heroes with Finn and Phasma, and 1 new large scale map in Crate, which I know most people won't consider to be base game content since it was added after launch, but all of that was made prior to the launch of the game, and the only reason it wasn't there was because they wanted to launch it with The Last Jedi coming out in cinemas. So regardless of what anyone says, for me that is still base game content, as it was finished and ready to go before the game launched. Personally, this one is a bit of a no-brainer. Battlefront 2 had pretty much double the amount of content of its predecessor, so for base game content, Battlefront 2 takes the points. Next up, however, we have post-launch content, and this is a bit of a different story. Battlefront 2 has obviously had one of the biggest turnarounds in gaming history, and a large portion of that was to do with the great content that we received after the game started to turn around. With that being said, Battlefront 2015 also had an awesome amount of post-launch content, actually getting a lot more, even though it was actually in a much shorter period of time. Battlefront 2 gave us 6 heroes and 1 large scale map for GA, as well as obviously 3 new supremacy maps as well, but Battlefront 2015 gave us 8 new heroes and honestly kind of too many maps to even count, as there were just a solid mix of large scale and small scale maps in there too. Now, the way in which Battlefront 2 delivered the content was objectively better for the fanbase. 1, there was no paywall, meaning everyone got the content and the community wasn't split in 2, and then 2, it was a constant feed of content between each month, rather than sort of waiting 3 months between content like we did in Battlefront 2015. Despite that though, I still personally think that the post-launch content in Battlefront 2015 was the better of the two. We got more content in a shorter period of time, and some of those DLC packs were just amazing. In fact, I'd say probably all of them were pretty amazing. Despite Battlefront 2 having awesome post-launch content, Battlefront 2015 wins out for me in this category. Now, last but definitely not least, we have the quality of life mechanics. So this is stuff like private matches, stat screens, and even things like the battle point system, for example. Essentially just anything that made the quality of life better within the game. One thing that I think Battlefront 2 improved on so much over Battlefront 2015 was the battle point system. In my opinion, this might have been one of the best changes implemented into the game, as it rewarded skill by giving the better players the first chance to get a hero and a reinforcement, which I know a lot of people might not have liked, but in my opinion that is the fairest way to go about it. Battlefront 2015, however, had stuff like private matches and stat screens, which for the Battlefront 2 community were two of the most requested additions from the launch of the game. Both games had certain aspects that were better than the other, but in my opinion, Battlefront 2015 had so many great aspects and mechanics that should have been in Battlefront 2, just like those private matches for example, or the star card loadouts, and because of that, Battlefront 2015 gets another point here for the quality of life. So that is it for all of the categories, and as you can see, the final score here is 5-4 in the way of Battlefront 2, so Battlefront 2 does just get away with the win in this one. It was actually way closer than I originally thought, and like I said earlier, it is completely subjective at the end of the day. Leave a comment down below letting me know which game you thought was the better game. Like I said, it was definitely closer than I thought, and I'm very curious to see how many of you guys agree or disagree with me down in the comments. That is going to do it for this one though, guys. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.